Well, hello everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to Rattlecast number 210. So glad you could join me. Today's guest, Lana Hechtman Ayers, is here. She'll be with us in about 10 minutes. But before we begin, I should say that Rattle is a publication of the Rattle Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit working to promote the practice of poetry. We've been in continuous publication since 1995 and are unaffiliated with any other organization. We just do it because we love poetry, and I know you do too. So please do click the like button and share. Make sure you subscribe. Ring the bell for notifications. I'm trying to boost our iTunes traffic. There's some analytics I could finally see, and it could be better. So let's get more reviews. Even if you're just watching this on YouTube, if you have an iTunes account, go to iTunes and leave a review. Just give it a couple stars, say it's a good show. I switched around some of the keywords, hoping to get more foot traffic on iTunes. So that's a goal coming up, and we'll see if you can help us out by leaving a review, because it's really helpful. We get the Rattlecast is spread all over the place. It's on Spotify, it's on iTunes, it's on Amazon, it's on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter, and there's several hundred people on each platform. It'd be nice to grow. I haven't really focused on certain podcast venues, so it'd be nice to grow some of those. And iTunes is the best. Now, to start out like we always do, we have the Poets Respond poet from Sunday, and Kelly Grace Thomas is here from the road in a car on the I-15 freeway to talk about her poem that we featured on Sunday. Hi, Kelly.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. Can you all hear me okay?
We can. It's great. It's so cool that you could stop at the internet, works in the middle of the freeway. We can see the car, driving in the background, beating feet out of LA. You definitely got to get out of LA. And it's good to see that you're making your way back up to the Bay Area. But you had this poem that was so moving. There were a lot of poems this week about Jimmy Buffett passing away. It was one of the prime topics. Probably a third of the poems were written about that. And it's always interesting when a celebrity dies to see, especially someone that I personally don't have any relationship with. I mean, I know Margaritaville, that's about it. And so to see all the ways that certain people connect with people around the world, and how much their lives mean, and have connections, personal connections, and that's what your poem is really about. Do you want to explain, what Jimmy Buffett meant to you, and why you wrote a poem about it?
Yeah, I'd love to. So, I grew up sailing a lot on my dad's sailboat, and there's really nothing to do on the water but stare at the ocean, and listen to music. And Jimmy Buffett was really the first poet I learned to read, that my father would say, that's a beautiful line. And I would be like, yes, absolutely, it is beautiful. And he'd say, now tell me why. So a lot of my early teachings and what poetry was and what music and what sound was really from Jimmy Buffett. There's also Jimmy Buffett really, he gives the people this feeling that summer's never over, that there's always hope, there's always another party coming, there's always a joke to laugh at, even if at your own expense. So I think that a lot of times, especially when things were hard in my family, not only did he provide art, but he provided this solace of warmth and just easy breezy summer days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and well, just want to go ahead and read the poem right now, if you don't mind. Can you see it from your car?
Yeah, I'm all set up.
Okay.
Thanks. The title of the poem is Mother, Mother Ocean, and it's a lyric from a Jimmy Buffett song called A Pirate Looks at 40. Mother, Mother Ocean. Summer never ends without taking. The basil gone to seed. Wildfires swallow the coast. The morning after Jimmy Buffett dies, my father says, long live the music. It's 6 a.m. and I'm crying at the coffee maker again. The last days of summer have already taken my mother. We sang Florida days at sunset to send her off. I can still see, before the cancer, before California, after the bankruptcy took everything but the boat, we sailed south, wind strumming the sails, Jimmy on the speakers, looking for better days, blue skies and ultraviolet rays. My mother leaning against the hull, two small children and a future too heavy to float. There is an ocean or family without Jimmy, his watery twang. Even after the record ends, there is still music, a sea of stingless salt, a mother singing.
Yeah, and that was, of course, Kelly Grace Thomas reading Mother Ocean, the Poet Respond poet from this Sunday. And it was interesting too. Jimmy Buffett as a poet is something people came to a lot. So it's interesting to hear he was one of the first poets that really meant something to you. And it's really just interesting how it makes me want to go back and look at his poems, or his songs as poems, I guess you could say. Is there one that is the
Great
sort
writer.
of is there one that's like the best to look at, like as far as the poetry goes? Is your favorite one from a poetry perspective?
Yeah, there's two I would recommend. One, but there's another one called When the Coast is Clear. And there's a lyric about how he goes down to the water, and the line goes like, I come down to me when the coast is clear. And that's just what poetry is, right? It's like people trying to talk to themselves to make sense of the work, and to have a coast that it feels safe enough. So, yeah, I'd recommend that one.
Well, very cool. Well, thanks so much for sharing that, Kelly. Just a great poem, very moving, and meant a lot to a lot of people this week. And it's always a pleasure seeing you. We were on Rattlecast around number 120, or maybe it was earlier than that, maybe 80. I can't remember. With your book Boat Burned. We lost her. Yeah, I was just gonna wonder what Kelly was up to, but that's okay. We'll just move on to the next show. It was getting choppy at the end too, but definitely check out Jimmy Buffett as a poet. Because I heard a whole bunch of people talk about being introduced to poetry through his lyrics, which is something that never even occurred to me. So do check that out, and rest in peace, Jimmy. Now we're going to take a quick break and go to our main guest, Lana Hechtman Ayers. So sit tight, and we'll be right back with more poetry. And we're back. Thanks for your patience. Like I said, today's guest is Lana Hechtman Ayers. She's the managing editor of 3 poetry presses: Concrete Wolf Poetry Series, MoonPath Press, and World Enough Writers. She facilitates generative writing workshops in the Amherst Method, which is something I want to talk about. Runs a poetry book club, helps other poets assemble manuscripts. She has a Poem of the Day newsletter. She has so much. She teaches at writers' conferences as well. She's the author of 8 poetry collections, 2 of which have come out in 2023, Overture and When All Else Fails. So we'll be talking about those 2 last books. She's got another one, her 9th, coming out in the spring, and we got one poem from there to start with, I think, too. That's the Autobiography of Rain. That's coming out in the spring, but we'll get a preview of that. But here she is, Lana Hechtman Ayers. Hey, Lana, how are you?
I'm great, Tim. I am so delighted to be here.
Yeah, I'm
Thank
so
you
glad
so
to have
much.
you as a guest. I've known, and your name has been familiar to me for so long with all the things you do in publishing. And then, we started publishing a few years ago, and it's great to finally meet you. I don't think we've ran into each other in person before. It's always really cool to meet poets whose names are super familiar, so I can put a face to the name and a personality too. It's great to have you on. And it is 9/11. Of course, it's the 9/11, September 11th show, the anniversary of that day. I had the Patriots Day ceremony at my daughter's school. She's in the choir, so she sang all those songs. And you have, a special connection to September 11th, a sad one, in a poem about it. Do you want to explain what the poem's about and what happened?
Sure. So my older brother, Alan, was a Red Cross volunteer and a trained EMT. And as fate beautiful and horrible as fate is, would have it, my brother who lived, I don't know if you know a lot about New York City, but sometimes when people live in Long Island, they don't go to Manhattan very much. My brother was somebody that lived on Long Island, worked on Long Island, very rarely ever went into Manhattan. But on September 11th, he had a meeting in building number 4 of the World Trade Center for his job, which was an electrical engineer. That's what he did by profession. And when after the plane struck the towers, the people in his building didn't want to let anyone go out because they didn't know what kind of havoc they were releasing people into. But the building number 4 was filling up with smoke as well. And my brother knew, we got to get out of here. And he was instrumental in letting the people that ran the building know, we've got to get out. We've got to get these people out. Now, building 4 was a smaller office building, but it did end up collapsing as well.
Oh, wow.
So he was instrumental in that. And because he was a trained EMT and a Red Cross volunteer, he stayed the entire day and helped with saving lives and clearing people out of the wreckage. And he ended up having to walk home through Queens and get a ride. But it was a really rough day. And I heard from him almost in the middle of the night, because I didn't even know he was in Manhattan. So when we all saw the news on TV, I never thought my brother.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like, it's fortunate not to even know to be that worried, I guess, right?
Yeah. But unfortunately, many of the rescuers there came down with illnesses, and my brother ended up with a very rare form of leukemia about 8 years later, which is related to the exposure of the burning jet fuel. It's related to toxin exposure. Mm-hmm. And he fought the good fight, but ultimately succumbed.
Yeah.
So this poem is actually after another poet's poem. Marie Howe has a poem called What the Living Do, which is about her brother who committed suicide. But it's a beautiful and moving poem, and it sort of gave me a way to shape what I wanted to say to my brother. And this poem was written at the beginning of the pandemic because I just thought of him, and I thought he would have been here to help. He could have been here to help if he only lived. So this poem is called What the Sheltering Do. Brother, my freezer, Arctic, resembles the old snow forts we built in childhood. And hot water does no good, making a flood and more ice. There is no repairman to call in this time of sheltering in place. This isn't the everyday we dreamed of. For weeks now, staring at faces on screens, TV, phone, laptop, I'm recalling being seated across from you at the coffee shop, your hair gleaming in a shaft of sun, your laughter cutting through the din of conversation piped in tunes. I stay home now to make my own brew. This is what those of us do who want to live. We cleave in place, cleave from one another to flatten the curve. This is how the ordinary serve. I didn't want you to leave that fateful day or ever. It's nearly spring here, bright with bloom, pink blossoms and green leaves erasing all memory of winter's blahs and grays. But winter's cold remains. My heater believes the calendar that proclaims spring and refuses to come up. I shiver, wearing several sweaters, no repairman to call. Turnips are all I eat for the 5th night this week because the market is out of everything, and facial tissues are what I use as toilet paper. This is what those of us who want to live do. You had no choice in being here or not. Terrorist disease took you from us. This is not the everyday we dreamed of. True, mine are ordinary griefs, broken appliances, whatever the store is out of each time. But as my washing machine refuses to spin, I'm gripped with a sadness so deep for what might have been if you hadn't left us before this global pandemic. You who manned the front lines on 9/11 saving lives. Despite the new great losses your heart would endure, you'd rescue so many more. You, brother, would as surely be hero now as then. I honor you. I will always honor you.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful and heartbreaking poem and story. What the Sheltering Do from Lana Hechtman Ayers. And that's from Lana's forthcoming book, which is out in the fall, The Autobiography of Rain. I mean, the spring, I should say. But
2024, the fall of 2024.
Oh, fall of 2024. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Fall of 2024. Yeah, the Autobiography of Rain. So, yeah, but a beautiful poem, and such a difficult thing to go through. And I imagine, writing a poem like that helps, right? Make it through the emotions and the feelings that are sort of bottled up inside, right? And was there a release into being able to write that?
Yes, I mean, I really just kind of wanted to talk to him, and it made it easier to do it on paper. It made it easier to feel like, well, this is how I communicate. This is my mode of reaching out, is trying to make poetry. And so, yeah, it does help to feel like, maybe there's an ear somewhere across the galaxy and he can hear.
Yeah. Well, I don't. We were going to talk about Patricia Fargnoli, your mentor, and I'm interested in always in how poets became to be poets. It's always a curious thing to me, how it happens. And how did you end up even seeking a mentor in the first place? What was your introduction to poetry? How did you find yourself on this path?
Well, it's another kind of strange occurrence, I guess you'd say. Fate had a hand in that as well. My father had been in the Navy and done work in the shipyard in Brooklyn. However, that closed. And after the Brooklyn shipyard closed, he had a hard time finding jobs and was out of work from time to time. And we needed charity to help us keep going. And one of the charity sacks that we got from a local church had clothing in it and was left in we had a basement. It was left in the basement. And I was down there kind of, futzing around. And lo and behold, there were poetry books at the bottom of this bag that had held clothing. I was about 5 or 6 years old, mind you. The books were by Rudyard Kipling. And I could read, actually, thanks to the fact that my next door neighbor, who was 5 years older than me, every day when she came home from school, she set up a little board in her basement and taught me her lessons. And so I was reading at, a 10-year-old or 11-year-old's level when I was 5 because she was my teacher. And so I got the books out of the bag and I started to read these poems. I didn't know they were poems, but I started to read these poems aloud. And there was a magic that happened just listening to the music of them. It felt like they were magic spells, some kind of incantations. And I don't think I really understood the poems so much as felt something really special about them. Now, I had a very difficult and kind of harrowing childhood because my mother was mentally ill. Although to me, she was just my mom. I didn't know until much later in life that this was a mental illness. I just thought I'm a bad kid and I can't do anything right and I deserve whatever comes to me. But poetry kind of just spoke to me of something other, and I can't even quite put it into words how I knew at 5 or 6 years old that this was something that was eventually, from that moment on, going to really not only make my life more livable, but save my life. It really did save my life. Because I would go on to keep reading other poets and understand that there were people out there who had suffered terrible things and not only survived, but thrived. And if they could do it, I could do it too.
Yeah, that's a really, really powerful message too, and a great story for finding poems for the first time. And then you mentioned that you were a mathematics major. as an undergraduate. So how did you get, and then you have a sci-fi streak as well, and wrote a time-traveling romance novel, which I hadn't heard of. And that's really interesting. So how did you, why was math a direction that you went?
Okay, so even though I was great at reading, I was still a very stupid 16-year-old. I wanted, and I was really into poetry. I had begun writing my own poems, as soon as I could hold a crayon. And I kind of knew that I wanted to pursue poetry, but I had skipped a few grades, and I was 16 when I graduated high school, ready to go to college, but not very bright because I wanted to go to Beloit University in Wisconsin because that's originally where Beloit magazine was. And I thought that's the best program for a poet to go to. And unfortunately, even though I had a scholarship, I couldn't afford the dorm. I didn't have, I couldn't afford the books. I couldn't afford anything else. And my mother had spent what little money had been given to me for college to put Formica on the kitchen cabinets, but that's another story. So I thought, if I can't go to Beloit to study poetry, there's no other college in the world good enough for studying poetry. There just isn't.
Oh, wow.
I was 16 and stupid. I think my grandpa used to say, cut off your nose to spite your face. Well, that's what I did.
Maybe stubborn.
So, well, I was good at math. I actually, my father was good at math. My mother was good at math. I kind of inherited their math ability. And it seems like I'll just be a math major. It's easy. And I went to the City University of Newark at Queens College because it was local and it was free. And I also had this, scholarship. And I actually got paid, $250 a year to go to college because I had a little scholarship money. So it was extra. And I was a math major there, which is really stupid because they had a great English department. Maria Ponti, the poet, was there. I mean, there were some great poets there, and I just ignored it because I was kind of, stubborn and stupid.
Well, that's interesting. An interesting background, and a great maybe a cautionary tale for people. Although, I mean, you ended up all right, I'd have to say, as far as the poetry goes, for sure. And then so somehow, you became really close to Patricia Fargnola, who you talked about, and you wanted to share a poem of her. She was your mentor. How did you end up meeting Pat, and what did she mean to you?
Well, I had met Pat in New Hampshire when I was living in New Hampshire. I'd gone to her readings. She had read at various local places, and I just was in love with her poetry. And I found out that she ran poetry workshops in Keene, New Hampshire, which was 2 hours from where I was living, but I was going to get on the road and go to the readings because she was an amazing poet. And that's how I met her. She's actually, I guess you'd say, my second poetry mentor. She just took me under her wing. She told me that I should be sending poems out into the world, and I never thought I should be doing that. I never thought I was good enough to do that. And she really encouraged me. And I also kind of wanted to go to an MFA, and she said, I didn't need an MFA, but if that will make you feel like you're less of a fraud, because I felt like a fraud, and I still do a lot of the time, then that's what you should do. And she said, I'll write your recommendation. And so I got an MFA because of Pat. And during my time in the program, she said, you're going to put together a book and you're going to send that book out. And I said, I'm not so sure about that. I'm going to the MFA because, I've been writing poetry on my own since childhood in a vacuum. I've just been going to the library, picking poets off the shelves that I find I like and enjoy. And I don't really know anything about poetry. I just know what I like. So I wanted to do the MFA to figure out the history of poetry in the United States, to figure out, what the different kinds of poetry were. What am I writing into? What am I speaking to as adding my voice to theirs, and just learning all about it. And that's what I got out of my MFA. I went there for that. And I really feel like I got the education I needed to understand what poetry really was. It wasn't just the poems I liked. It was something bigger and grander and a tradition for thousands of years. And I needed to know that.
Well, let's share this poem that you wanted to, Roofmen, by Patricia.
And this is from her first book, which came out when she was in her 60s. It won the May Sarton Prize, judged by Mary Oliver. And it's one of my favorite poems. It remains one of my favorite poems of hers. The title of the book is Necessary Light, and that title occurs in the poem. Roofmen by Patricia Fargnoli. Over my head, the roofmen are banging shingles into place, and over them, the sky shines with a light that is almost past autumn and bright as copper foil. In the end, I will have something to show for their hard labor. Unflappable shingles, dry ceilings, one more measure of things held safely in a world where safety is impossible. In another state, a friend tries to keep on living, though his arteries are clogged, though the operation left a 10-inch scar, and near his intestines, an aneurysm blossoms like a deformed flower. His knees and feet burn with constant pain. We go on. I don't know how sometimes. For a living, I listen 8 hours a day to the voices of the anxious and the sad. I watch their beautiful faces for some sign that life is more than disaster. It is always there, the spirit behind the suffering, the small light that gathers the soul and holds it beyond the sacrifices of the body. Necessary light. I bend toward it and blow gently. And those hammerers above me bend into the dailiness of their labor beneath concentric circles, a roof of sky, beneath the roof of the universe, beneath what vaults over it. And don't those journeymen hold a piece of the answer? The way they go on, layering one gray speckled square after another, nailing each down firmly, securely.
Yeah, beautiful metaphor for life, and a great poem by Patricia Fargnoli. That was Roofmen, of course, from her one of her early books. And so what was it about that poem that you learned and incorporated in your own poetry? Because I can kind of hear your voice a little bit in there too. There's some things you have in common. So what is it that you took away from Patricia and her poems that you use yourself?
Well, one of the things about her poetry is she always was a keen observer of the world around her, and she could see the connectedness to everything, that these roofmen are also leaning into the dailiness of their lives, and they're making something beautiful. It may only be a roof, but it's an important thing, and it's beautiful, and it matters in the scheme of things. And so, just to see things, not only what's around you, but how what's around you is really intricately involved in everyone else's lives in some way. In some way, we're all connected. And that's what I took from her. And I hope that comes across in some of my poems. And it's a huge compliment to say that you hear her in me.
Well, that's the thing that I do hear is that there's a sense of, you're characterized as a poet who writes about grief a lot. And there's a way that grief is sort of a way to frame gratitude and appreciation. And so there's the interplay of those two things, of noticing and paying attention to things to find consoling in the face of grief that sort of go through most of your work that I've read. And so there's that sense of just of almost a Buddhist nature of paying attention to the moment that shines through both your works, I'd say.
Oh, thank you. That's really great to hear. Yeah, and I think also that despite the pain that she refers to, her friend who may not live, and all the painful stories she listens to each day, she was a psychiatric social worker for the town that she lived in. That there's always some kernel of beauty and the ability to keep going. There's always something inside each person that can keep them from succumbing to suffering. It's always there. It's just a matter of how to nurture it.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what your poetry definitely does. Let's move on and share some poems from your earlier book from this year. 2 books in a year is something to be proud of for sure. This is When All Else Fails that came out in the spring. And you wanted to start out with the poem from Rattle, summer issue, when you say you're from New York City. So definitely, New Yorkers can relate to this poem, I'd say.
Yes. Well, also, this is my first print poem in Rattle, so that was really exciting for me. And I have to say, Patricia Fargnoli is the one that turned me on to Rattle.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
She having been published in the early 2000s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think her poem was fun. If anyone wants to go back, maybe we'll share it on the open lines if there's time later too.
Yeah. So this is when you say you're from New York City. The entire borough of Queens doesn't count, especially our sinkhole spot in the borough. No yellow cab traffic honks or women striding through streets in high-heeled pumps. Only roaring from Idlewild Airfield, practically at our back door. Rows of identical box houses built over swamps, low-slung shops with parking lots the size of half a Manhattan block, and the oxymoronic elevated subway hurtling by, screeching brakes. Mother was the stay-at-home kind who'd rather be anywhere else, especially singing on the radio or starring in some pot boiler like the black and white movie star autographed photos framed on the walls, like relations we'd be the black sheep for. 5 a.m. every weekday, Daddy disappeared wearing army green coveralls, his nickname Mac, machine stitched into the bib center pocket. He returned home 12 hours later, knuckles calloused, smile askew, his eyes puddles reflecting overcast sky. I had a big brother with hands like those giant junkyard claws. Took, crushed, didn't matter whose or what. My tennis shoes too tight, big toe poking out like an earthworm, rain smothered out of his dirt home. Daddy's paycheck had as much stretch as a number 2 pencil. So we accepted food from the church pantry and the shame of walking 10 blocks home with charity sacks filled with unnatural orange cheese the size of a car battery, cans of green beans slimy as the slugs that infested the shrubbery. Outside our brick front asbestos-sided ranch house, always a mortgage payment behind. Saturdays, Daddy mowed the 3 grass blades jutting out from the rowdy dandelions that stood in for lawn, while Mother escaped to some beauty shop for half the day, came back with a teased high dome of hair no robin would ever make her home. Once in a while, on a generous Sunday, there was Mickey D's for supper, 1 large order of fries split between the 4 of us. Rainy weekend nights drove us each to our own shadowy spiderwebbed corners of the house. Mine sitting atop moldering mismatched shoes in the damp hall closet, the scent of mothballs, a kind of anesthetic. But if the weather held, we torched marshmallows, no matter the season, in a rusted out charcoal grill behind the house in its gravel pit of a backyard, swatting flies or mosquitoes or whatever was biting at us, as something always was. Such was our glamorous New York City life.
And that was When You Say You're from New York City, from Lana Hechtman Ayers' book, When All Else Fails. And so the details in that poem are so great. Earlier in the broadcast, you mentioned that there was more to poetry than you thought. Like poetry was something more. And can you explain, like, what did you mean? What did you find that poetry was? I think we've hinted at it a little bit, but can you explain what poetry actually is?
Well, I mean, it turns out that poetry has become kind of almost like a spiritual practice for me. It's how I seek to connect not only with the deepest part of myself, but how I try to fathom the world and all its mysteries and contradictions. I mean, I don't really know exactly how I feel or what I think until I start writing things down. And the other thing is, I feel like the poems themselves are my way to connect with this, with others, my way of saying, we're all in this together. we're more alike than we are different. And so that's kind of how it functions for me. I sometimes say kindness is my religion, but poetry is my spiritual practice. And this kind of brings me to a really wonderful little story in that when this poem appeared in Rattle, someone reached out to me, found my website, found my contact link, and wrote to me. And that person turned out to be Arthur Russell,
Oh, that's
who
funny.
who won the the Rattle Chapbook contest at the car wash. And I don't know if you wouldn't mind, can I read you his email?
Yeah.
I hope Arthur won't mind.
Yeah.
So I just thought it was the sweetest thing. He said, "Dear Miss Ayers, I got my new Rattle today and opened to the first poem, yours, which was fantastic. I loved the way you owned your place in Queens and Queens's place in you. I'm from Brooklyn, so a different story, but I was nodding throughout. So thank you. If you have a mailing list, please put me on it. Best regards, Arthur Russell. P.S. I won the 2023 Rattle Chapbook Prize, so my book At the Car Wash will be coming to you in September." Well, first of all, what poet doesn't really, really feel so heartened by a message from a stranger who has read your poem and connected to it? We write in such a vacuum, and we often think that maybe no one cares what we're doing. It doesn't matter. But here's someone who's a complete stranger who looked me up and found my contact information and took the time it took to write me such a sweet, sweet note. And I looked Arthur up in return and found some of his poems and knew that he was a kindred spirit. And as fate once again takes a little step in, I had a reading arranged with Open Books Seattle on Zoom, and I needed to find another poet whose collection was coming out at the same time as mine to invite as a co-reader. So I invited Arthur to read with me because our books were coming out together, and we ended up reading together for Open Books on this past Saturday. And it was a wonderful reading. Arthur's poems are monumental. They're epic. They're wonderful. And I made the mistake of going second, so I'd have to follow all his monumental poems. But it was just incredible. I mean, he's a terrific reader. I know you're having him on Rattlecast in a few weeks. All you guys have to tune in. The book is amazing. If some of you are silly enough not to be Rattle subscribers and don't have a copy of it, contact Arthur to get a copy of it. It's just wonderful. So poetry connects us to people we never expect to know. Poetry does confirm that we are all in this together, as I said. I mean, I just feel like it does matter that we put our work out there, and it does matter if it touches someone else's lives. It brightens someone's day for a few moments, or maybe they feel less alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, Arthur book, I should say, is book At the Car Wash is right here, the chapbook. And if anybody, wants to subscribe too, they get it if you subscribe right now and you don't subscribe in print to Rattle yet. And he's going to be the guest on the Rattlecast October 2nd, so 3 weeks from now. But that's just such a great point, though, about reaching out to people. Like having a note like that. And that's why in every issue of Rattle, we put people's either email address or website or whatever they have, some way of connecting them if they have one, into the back so people can reach out and share, because it just means so much. I mean, it's not like anyone's going to get rich writing poems, but we do sort of get rich in spirit by having this connection that other people, we're living in a time, even just having a conversation with a stranger is difficult. I have this experience, with my kids at the playground, and you sort of talk to the parents next to you, and it's so hard to break through that small talk of like the weather. And, poets are people who get to break through. And so, reaching out to a poet after you appreciate a poem just means so much. And so it's a great, exercise to practice. And then great things come out of it too, like these kind of connections. So it's a really cool story. And I'm looking forward to have Arthur. It's Arthur Russell, somebody's asking in the comments, Russell. But you'll get that if you have the chapbook, which come with all subscriptions too. But let's read some more poems, Lana. What do you want to read next? I think we're going to stick with When All Else Fails, right?
Okay. Yeah, I would like to read I Never Thought to Lie Down with My Father.
Okay.
This was a poem that took me um, probably 20 years to write. It was a really tough one.
Hmm.
I never thought to lie down with my father, but that July afternoon, I held him as one might a lover, his body half the weight it had been, all cancer. Sunbeam dust dancers through the transom. A fan fussed back and forth, billowing swampy air. My fingers grazed the prickly scar above his left ear, shadowy bristle, pretending hair might again grow there. Where once was muscle and sweat, folds of emptied flesh. The bedspreads embroidered roses, scentless impostors. I lay in my mother's place, face to face with Daddy, shivery, cold, sobbing. I'm not ready to go. So much left. Everywhere he was fragile. My lips warmed his waxy skin, while a flip clock clicked softly from the bedstead, spun red-lit rectangles of white numerals, as if a train station timetable, reporting departures, arrivals.
Yeah, what a beautiful last image. It reminds me of my grandmother's clock, too. Just brings me back to that. A really touching poem. I never thought to lie down with my father. Again, from When All Else Fails by Lana Hechtman Ayers. And you mentioned that poem took 20 years to write. What was it about, what was it that took so long? Was it, what was the struggle?
Well, just how to talk about this kind of intimacy with my father. He was a really kind of funny man. He probably was the person that invented the dad joke. He was a working guy. He wasn't book educated, really. He kind of probably was ditching school more than he was there playing basketball. So we didn't have a lot to talk about when it came to poetry or books, but he was always very supportive of me and very kind to everyone he met, and caring, and the first person to pitch in if there was a problem with neighbors. So we didn't, it wasn't really what I would call a closeness that I wanted and hoped for. And so this was a very strange kind of situation where my father was so weak, and he would only have a couple months to live after this. And I just wanted to comfort him so badly, and didn't know if I could, didn't know if it was allowed, if I was allowed to provide this kind of physical comfort. We were not very physically expressive family. There wasn't, a lot of affection in public or behind closed doors. But this was something I just really wanted to do, and it was one of the, I guess, the closest moments I ever felt to my dad, when I could just sit there and lie there with him and comfort him. And, just he was in tears, and I was just comforting him the best way that I knew how. And I didn't know how to express it. I didn't know how to make it not sound, I don't know, lurid or weird, or to me, it was such an, unusual thing to be able to have this kind of physical contact with my father, and for it to be, me comforting him as he's dying, really. So it was a really hard poem to write, and I wanted to do it in a way that would honor what happened and honor him. And it just took forever for me to be able to get the words on the page in a way that didn't seem inadequate, or, I don't know. It was just really difficult.
Yeah, well, it's one of the most important, topics too, I think, that's being written about right now, because there's so many people, because I read submissions and I see, what everybody's struggling with. And there's so many people, learning about and trying to figure out how to deal with the end of their parents' lives, because it's sort of the way that population demographics are going. There's a huge percentage of people that are going through this right now. And we're in a society that we don't really talk about that or address it. We sort of like to pretend that death doesn't exist, or it's like, video games where you pop right back up, or action movies, or you go off to heaven and there's no real grappling with it. And so you mentioned poetry as a spiritual practice, and that's really the point of spiritual practice, is to find ways to deal with the difficulties of life. And so finding a poem like this that helps people as a guide to how to handle those end of moment times, know that you're not alone in going through the struggles that we all are eventually, is a really powerful thing to do. And it seems like that ties right back into your the purpose of poetry to you from the start, was to ways to deal with that grief.
Yes, no, that's true. And I don't know, I guess I just wanted to express that it's okay to care in whatever way is best and feels natural to you, Yeah. And
well, let's read the next poem too. The next one we have is Where I Write From.
Oh, this is kind of a funny one. I'm trying to be funny, I guess. Being called the grief poet, I do hope I have moments that are more light in my poems. And, even though this poem mentions death, I'm hoping it isn't a hard poem to read. Where I Write From. From seasonal confusion, it's May with overnight freeze warnings these last 3 days. The sky sighs white. Squirrels hang upside down, and the air smells of cinnamon and burnt rubber. From under my desk, where the shadows speak spider and a dozen pens have gone to die, there's a steady hum from the internet cable, like a hornet's nest just before the storm of stings. From sleeplessness and dreams of exams I've not studied for, life comes with no official manual, does it? Or if so, can anyone tell me where to obtain a copy, preferably used? I'm a fan of margin notes and stains in the shape of swans that could either be tuna salad or PB&J. From dread, more test appointments looming ahead, from off the scale to undernourished. Medicine is an art, but there are no medical museums I would willingly visit. Give me a Rothko, a Van Gogh. They are the true apple a day. From transition, one addressed to the next. Somewhere else, my packages still won't arrive, and the neighbors will operate heavy machinery at 5 a.m. From my next life, where there are ice cream shops on every street corner and the sky rains coffee. And guess what? I have that extra hand I've always needed. Wish you were here.
That's great. Love that ending too. Where I Write From. Another book, a poem from When All Else Fails by Lana Hechtman Ayers. And that poem, a prose poem with those prose blocks. And it brings up the craft topic, which, we'd love to hear more about your writing process. Already, maybe we'll start with this one. Paul Mitchell Bernstein asked how you decide that a poem is finished, which is always a good question. You mentioned taking 20 years to write that last one. How do you know when you've got it where you want it?
That's a really, really tough question. I can edit indefinitely if I don't stop myself. There are two things that happen. I have a poem and I feel like it has some meat to it. I feel like it has some weight to it, and I want to keep working on it. Or there are poems that I've worked on, 10, 12, 15 times, and I realize they are never going to sing, and I just hit delete. So there, I've deleted hundreds of my own poems from the computer because I just feel like this is never going to say what I want it to say. I just have to start from scratch. But as far as being complete, that's really hard. It's really hard because I always feel like I can do better. But I think if I get to a point, and I write all my poems, almost exclusively write all my poems out loud. I talk them as I'm writing on the paper. And so if I get to a point in editing where I talk through the poem and I don't want to scratch anything else out finally, then maybe it's done. But I know after my first book came out, I was reading through it and I just wanted to go, and I can't remember which poet it was, but there is a poet I heard of who's gone, who would go to the bookstores and edit his books.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to do that. I felt like, oh, why did I let this go? It was too soon.
Yeah, well, I feel the same way. And there's some poems that I wish I put in that I took out, and I was like, why did I take that out? There's all these things we go through. Well, we talked about the end of poems now, but let's go backwards. And how do poems begin? How do you know when you have something, a fish on the line that you can reel in as a real poem?
Well, most of my poems are inspired by other poems. Honestly, I
Mm-hmm.
read poetry every day. I try to start my morning with reading a few poems. I read the rattle poem that comes into my inbox. And most of those inspire me in some way. And I can sit down with a poem after having read it and just start writing. And that's really where it comes from. And the other thing that inspires me, actually, we were going to talk about the Amherst Method, is writing with others. So I feel there's an incredible um, force, a creative force, that we all share. And when you're writing with others, we're just tapping into that creative unconscious, and we can play off of each other in a way that we don't write when we write alone. The Amherst Method is something that was started by Pat Schneider in Massachusetts many years ago. And basically what it is it assumes that everyone is a writer. Nobody needs any special training. Everyone already has the gifts they need.
Mm.
And the method is to write to prompts, to have people in the group comment on what resonates, what stays with them, what they enjoy, and no critique whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the method. And she started practicing this with women in prison.
Hmm.
And something miraculous happened. After all these workshops, the women in prison decided to finish get their high school diplomas. Many went off to college when they got out of prison. Some went to graduate school. They found when they had a voice, and that their voice was listened to, and that they were respected, that they became more respectful of themselves, and they could do more in the world and feel they were good. They were forces for good. So these women's lives changed radically. And Pat Schneider said, well, why can't we all do this? And it can make us all better. And so I trained in the Amherst Method with Pat Schneider many years ago, and attended Amherst Method workshops and led Amherst Method workshops. And I just feel like when I'm writing in a group with others, it's just, I feel like I have their creative sources to draw upon as well. And what will sometimes happen, you'll be writing to a prompt that's a poem, or a prompt that's has something to do with maybe the season of winter. And then there's 10 of us in the group, and suddenly 3 of us have a fan whirring back and forth in our writing in a hot, steamy room. But the prompt was winter. So how did 3 of us end up with a fan?
Mm-hmm.
So I think there is really something to this collective unconscious that we're all drawing into. And the other thing is, when you write with other people and you all respond to the same prompt with such unique voices, we learn from each other's craft how to make our own better.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. I mean, so many directions to go with that. I mean, there's so much healing power to poetry, and making sense of the chaos of your life, and how much comfort that gives. And also, I just love the idea that everybody is already a poet, because I definitely believe that. And you see that in the Young Poets Anthology that we do every year, where, I mean, kids, we learn language sort of through poetry, and then we become poets. And since language is like central to what we do as human beings, like, we all end up being poets, because poetry is the way we like speak and remember, and just engage with the world, and make objects out of the nothingness and the randomness that's all around us. And so the kids, you find that at age like 8 or 9, they're just great at poetry. I mean, and then it's almost like we get a little self-conscious, and sort of inhibit ourselves, or try to fit along, or to do what we think people want to hear, rather than express ourselves naturally. And so it almost feels like learning how to write again as an adult is like a peeling away of those layers that are just getting in the way, clogging up the system that was already having us poets. Is there anything like that? It reminds me too of teaching, coaching little league or tennis or something. You always reward the positive, and that's how you get people to keep going and get better. It's not criticizing and say, oh, you have to get your elbow up and stand this way. It's like, oh, that part was good. You swung well that way, and so there's a way that positive feedback is empowering. So what's the process like as far as that, about getting the best poems out of people without without any criticism, without any workshop? Because we kind of assume that sitting around and saying, oh, this line's a cliche is how poems come to be, and that's really not how it works at all.
Well, it's really fascinating because I've always been a workshop junkie. I attended a writing workshop with Oton Riccio at the Boston Center for Adult Ed for 12 years. And it was your typical critique workshop. And I learned tons about craft. And I stayed in that workshop for 12 years. But he had this wonderful saying, which like, if you knew, and you would know, and we all knew our poems weren't working when he said this, wow, that's interesting. And it shows a lot of feeling. So he didn't really critique so much as say that. And when when he said that, that was the thing. But honestly, having been doing workshops in the Amherst Method and having been in critique workshops, I can say that the writing improves leaps and bounds in an Amherst Method workshop much more quickly than it does in a critique workshop. And I think it's because people can take any risk they want with the writing and try things they've never tried before and know they're not going to get slapped for it. And the other thing is you really hear things about other people's craft that you like, and you think, I really like the way this person writes dialogue. Hey, I'm going to try some dialogue. And so you learn techniques just from being in a group of people, and because we're all so varied, we learn each other's strengths, and we can improve that way. And I think it would probably work that way in any field. I think, the kids at soccer or baseball can see what this kid is doing right and try to emulate that.
Yeah, for sure. And that's just a way to keep everything positive and moving forward instead of, freezing and going backward. The other thing, I think I did one workshop, because I did a workshop with Ellen Bass. I haven't done very many workshops. I think she uses the Amherst Method, because what she was creating was a sort of like a safe space where everybody could share any kind of emotional thing, and it became almost like a group psychology situation where there were like 10 of us in a room. We were like sharing our most personal and traumatic and stories. I decided to write a poem about like the most shameful thing I ever did or thought of, and so I wrote a poem about that I've never shared anywhere else, but I felt free to share it at that workshop, which generated a whole bunch of stuff and got so much flowing as far as creativity goes. Is that aspect of it, is it sort of a psychological session almost to you? Like, what do you feel like, is there like a healing path going on there intentionally at those workshops?
I don't know if it is intentional, but I think it's definitely happening. I definitely think that it's therapeutic, because we're just accepted for who we are, no matter what we say and write. And that's pretty therapeutic. That's pretty life enhancing, to be accepted for who you are and what you've done, no matter what. I trained as a therapist as well. So I've done some counseling, and yeah, it's definitely, I think, important in counseling. If you want someone to heal, you have to accept who they are, and just help them be their best selves.
Yeah, for sure. Let's keep the poems coming. I want to make sure we get through a couple more at least. But if anybody has any questions for Lana, leave them in the chat windows either on Facebook or YouTube, and I'll pass anything else along. We'll talk a little bit more, but let's hear another poem.
Okay.
Maybe move on to Overtures, probably, which is a very different book, we should say.
It is a very
sort
different
of style. Book. When All Else Fails is a very, personal story type book, moving through memory and history and things like that. And this is a much more, I don't know, how would you characterize this book, Overtures?
So When All Else Fails is more, it's just more narrative. It really is. Whereas Overtures is more lyrical. It's more philosophical. It's more examining the world and life in it than it is personal, although there are personal stories. And, I feature as the main character in many of the poems. But yeah, it is definitely more lyrical and philosophical.
Well, do you want to start with I still don't know if God is a storm or a falcon or a great song? Great title in that poem, first of all.
And that title is taken from Rilke. and his poem. That was the last line of his poem. So that was my title. I still don't know if God is a storm or a falcon or a great song. The blank sheet of paper is warm beneath my fingers, as if alive as my own skin that wants peace written upon it after weeks of worry to come. Calm is not sticky, splinters even in good weather. Rejections come flooding in as if from a failed dam. Who am I to ask who am I of anyone, of God, of editors? Walls wait quietly. Polished wood snores imperceptibly. My neighbors have gone out into the lightning storm to clear nettles as if they are a nuisance. I want to beg of you to brew tea to cure my flu of conscience. Who am I to crave joy as war rages a continent away? Children are poisoned from their own kitchen faucets in Flint, Michigan, and on native lands raped by pipelines. Buck up, the voice of America in my head says, a Sousa march playing on loop in the background. I want to love well as Buddhists love all. Only this sheet of paper accepts my hobbled apology. Who I am is a hazard, broken glass, beware. But look how I still shine.
Yeah, and that was a poem from Overtures, the most recent book from Lana Hechtman Ayers. I still don't know if God is a storm or a falcon or a great song, after the Rilke poem. And so what about the actual, like, when you sit down to write, you said you speak them out loud. What is how do you find the shape of a poem? How do you find the line breaks and the movement? Are you mimicking the sounds and trying to get that feel on the page, or is there something else to the line breaks? We saw one prose poem, and so you see the difference between a prose poem and a lineated poem like that. So what is it for you that how does the poem take its shape once you take it from that audio, that verbal that you're speaking out loud, and putting it on the page?
Well, on the page, it looks little like what it's going to look like in the final product. I don't really have line breaks on my page. I kind of write straight across in a plain notebook. I don't find the shape of a poem till later, and I have to speak it out again and type it. Now, as I'm speaking and typing, it feels like I can figure out where I need to breathe.
Yeah.
Which I can't really do. When it's initially coming out, it usually comes out in fits and starts, but in those starts, I don't want to stop to figure out line breaks. I just want to keep going.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing Sandra Eon points this out, and this is what I was going to bring up next, actually, so it's perfect timing. But you do so much work as an editor. I mean, we mentioned the 3 presses that you work on right now simultaneously. So I'll phrase it like Sandra says. She says, I'd love to hear her perspective on how being an editor influences her own work. And you publish such amazing work. Your vision is evident. And so yeah, that's exactly the question I was going to ask. What is your relationship to editing in your own work? What do you take from it?
Well, I feel like there are so many voices out there that need to be heard, and it's my privilege to be an editor and a publisher. It really is. I feel like I'm giving back to poetry for what poetry gave to me. And I try, although some of the people I published would not say so, I try to be as unintrusive an editor as I can be. And I just try to really honor the person's voice each time. And I do have a vision, and it's my vision. And luckily it's varied. So I've published, some experimental poets and some narrative poets and some lyrical poets and every combination in between. But mostly what I do is fall in love with a manuscript. And when I fall in love with the manuscript, that's how I know to publish it. And it's an emotional response more than anything else. It's not, being picayune about semicolons or about whether the word is repeated too many times or whatever people might want to edit. I just think I'm in love with this, and this needs to go out in the world. But there are poets whose books I have more of a hand in, because maybe they're not in the right order.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I don't know, that I'm a Libra Virgo on the line, so part of me likes ordering, and so it's really important to me that a poetry book invite you in from the first page, that
Mm-hmm.
you as a reader feel like you're being included. And sometimes poets don't start with a poem that makes the reader feel included. They start with a poem that appeared in their best journal instead of starting with an order that says, here I am, I want to share this journey with you.
Mm-hmm.
So I do sometimes reorder poems. That's what I do more than anything. I will offer some minor edits from time to time, but I try to really respect each person's voice and let it shine for what it is. That's really important to me.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear another editor because that's my perspective too. I keep like the lightest hand possible. Like if there's some, line that's really off or a poem doesn't start in the right spot or goes on longer than it should and the ending, you kind of blew past the ending is a common one. In the chapbooks, there's sometimes, even in Arthur's chapbook, there were a few poems that sort of took it on a detour that we didn't have time for, and so I kind of pulled it back and said, hey, that should be in the full-length book later. So a few things like that, but not much. And it's because I feel like there's sort of ways that the idiosyncrasies of a voice, add something, and it's not like there's this clean, like this is the way to write a poem or this is the way to say a sentence. Like we always have this, the variety in the way we encounter things adds so much to it that if you strip it away, you lose a lot more than you gain by making something kind of flawless, whatever that would even mean. And there's also a way that even in signals physics, there's a way that white noise in the background adds to a signal because there's something to push off of, and so there's ways that to explain why that works, but it does. And so there's a way that having a little bit of noise, a little messiness makes the poetry more alive. Is that your experience too?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think a poem can be edited to death and just taking the life out of it. It hurts when that happens, when people when I, and that happens sometimes because of the Amherst Method, I'm there when the poem is born. And then when I see it later, I think, what did they do? Why did they take out all of the wonderful stuff?
Yeah, it's so funny too. I mean, I have the experience a lot where I say, the poems, this sounds great, but this stanza feels so off. Like it doesn't feel like it has the energy of the rest of the poem. And so often the poet will write back and say, oh, that's the one that we workshopped and I changed a bunch of things. And I say, oh, well, show me the original. And the original,
Right.
It has this sort of consistent life and energy. It's like a poem is like a living, breathing thing. And if you take away and you carve too much of it, there's not like the poem left anymore. And I think that's a real thing. So it's cool to hear another editor has the same perspective.
Yeah. You can definitely just kill your poems by over editing them.
Well, we have some more time. Let's see. Let's do one more poem and then another question or two, and then one last poem. Maybe we can finish out if you don't mind doing it that way.
All right. Well, this is a poem I wrote in memory of Philip Levine, a teacher I only studied with once. We had like a 3-hour workshop, but he so impressed me with he was so down to earth and kind, but also really brilliant. He may be one of the most intelligent people I've ever met, and I don't think people knew that about Philip Levine. So when I wrote this poem, I also conflated him with another a writer who I just adore, which was Kurt Vonnegut, who was also a pretty brilliant guy.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a poem in memory of Philip Levine. A simple truth. I imagine Philip Levine time-shifting in Tralfamadorian fashion to 1936, where he is an angel on the shoulder, weeping as Lorca is tortured, then murdered. To Fresno State, his first year teaching, where on a lunch break he sits with a student reciting Rethke. To one April in Detroit, the mud biblical, men milling, queued up for news of work that never arrives. Back to the mills, haunted as the men's eyes who labored there, understanding one human being is everyone. And how many more lives than the 6 million hearts stopped by Hitler does he daily visit with his words? Grass, boats, dust, wind, the darkening skies, 2 sons, a brother, the loves declared, unnamed desires that were answered not by their aims, but by the simple truths. small red potatoes, melting butter, salt. The book is open to the first page yesterday. Tomorrow is always the 14th of February. And today it is 1941, 5 minutes to 8 a.m., sweet Phil, Billy Pilgrim. This day never ends. Yes, oh yes, it is enough to say what you can. The gift of transcribing ordinary suffering into extraordinary joy. Your name hangs in the brilliant morning air. A feather, eyelid of a magpie closed.
Yeah, another beautiful poem from Overtures. That was A Simple Truth in memory of Philip Levine. And you mentioned writing a lot of after poems. What do you think goes into a good after poem? How do you make it more than a restatement of what the poet said? Because that's, I guess, the danger, that you admire a poem so much that you sort of repeat it. So what do you do? Like why? What makes you want to write a poem after another poem, and then how does it function as a good poem?
Well, I think what makes me want to write a poem after a poem is just that poem has achieved some epiphany that I've been searching for my whole life. And I want to get to my own epiphany. I want to find my own epiphany that speaks to that poem in some way, but also is really my own journey there. And I think in order to be a good after poem, it really has to just take off in a direction that's very precisely personal, rather than staying with the original poet's message. I think you have to have your own message.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to close it out, what do you think? You have this other book forthcoming too. What's the perspective? Where are you going next with your books? You've delved into this autobiographical realm, and then this different sort of tact with overtures. What are you working on now?
Well, so the next book is kind of more about how beauty in the world can save us, in terms of the natural world, art, poetry, music. So it's more about beauty, despite all the troubles there are, and that we humans can create beauty as much as we can create destruction. So that's kind of the message, I think, of the Autobiography of Rain, or at least I hope it is and will be. And I'm actually working on, this sounds awful because here I am, the grief poet. I'm actually now working on poems about death and just different ways of thinking about death and connecting to death and coming to terms with death. As I'm aging, I'm losing more and more people, as we all do. And that's just a fact of aging. And also thinking about the death of our earth and what we're losing here. So that's kind of what the next book's going to be about. But I don't want it to be depressing.
Yeah, well, definitely. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, there's important topics that we don't talk about because they're depressing, but then we don't end up talking about them. We don't learn, and we're not ready for death. So it's an important thing to be talking about from every angle possible. I think it'd be good to close out maybe on Manhattan Island from Overtures. Do you want to do that poem last?
Sure. So this was a poem originally in a chapbook that was an homage to T.S. Eliot's 4 quartets. So this is Manhattan Island 5. It has an epigraph. Time is a storm in which we are all lost. William Carlos Williams. To investigate the universe, converse with Aristotle, whose insistence on wholeness misled astronomers and mathematicians for centuries. Or go knock on the door of poor Copernicus, whose heliocentric system shook those robed ones in Rome to the core. Or have a face-to-face, but do not race with Zeno, so keen on proving continuity of motion impossible. Be discreet if you should meet Gödel, for he'll talk your ear off about the fundamental incompleteness of any set. Let us not forget Newton, who may or may not have been snoozing under an apple tree when he came to understand that attraction and action operating over a distance is the very stuff of gravity. Yet sadly, the mechanics of the universe may not be mechanical at all. When one examines the very small subatomic world, Abandon all intuition, ye who enter there. Nothing is logical or even predictable, though mankind's curiosity wishes it so and clings to the notion of certainty. But to apprehend the intersection of the macro with the micro, the infinitely large with the infinitesimally small, is a job for someone called to quantum physics. Not an occupation either, but obsession, wonder, and disbelief, and requiring an entire lifetime of surrender to the selfless pursuit of perhaps. For most of us, there is no way even to imagine Einstein's space-time, to conceive the warpable weave of the cosmos, or the duality of light, leaving as a wave, arriving as a particle. The wild world unseen, a Fermian gang of quirky quarks, a mass of massless bosons, a sextet of tasteful leptons. A writhing world we'll never see with our eyes at all, but can only theorize and hope. Only calculated guesses, tropes, followed by dispute and ponderous new guesses. In science, observation, experiment, careful measurement, and knowledge only go so far. The rest is imagination. Here, hypothesized dark matter suggests boundless mass. Here, space and time are reconciled as one. The void, no empty place, brims with potential energy, so that nothingness itself is a source of something charged. And energy is matter in another state throughout time. For most of us, the universe will remain a sublime mystery. We are only defeated by not employing our creativity as well as our logic. Time is the fire, though none conceive the rate of its flow, in which we all burn.
Yeah, another great poem. Science almost as a metaphor for poetry, and of course, at the end, all science is poetry too. So beautiful back and forth there. Manhattan Island 5. Lana, thanks so much for being a guest today. It's been a pleasure talking to you and looking deeply into your work. A lot of resonance too with what we try to do here at Rattle. So it's really fun to get to know you better. Thanks for being a guest.
Thank you so much. It's been such a privilege.
Yeah, that was Lana Hechtman Ayers. And of course, Lana has 2 books that are just out this year, When All Else Fails and Overtures. You can find all that on Lana's website, which is Lana Ayers. That's LanaAyers.com, LanaAyers.com. You can find this book and then the forthcoming book too, The Autobiography of Rain, forthcoming. So do check all those out. Lana does a whole bunch of things. I mean, of course, we mentioned Concrete Wolf Poetry Series, MoonPath Press, World Enough Writers. She's got a daily news email. So much going on with Lana. So check out more if you would. We're going to take a quick break and go to our open lines. So don't forget there's open lines too. How the open lines works, you can email your poem if you haven't submitted it to the Rattle Prompt Poem of the Month category. You can email it right now to Open Lines. That's openmic@rattle.com. If you submitted it already through Submittable for consideration of this month's Prompt Poem of the Month, you can, I'll just pull it up there. But if not, email it though to OpenMic. That's openmic@rattle.com. And then find the Zoom link, which I'm going to paste into the chat windows on YouTube and Facebook. And join us over there on the Zoom, and we will share whatever poems you like. There's a prompt every month, of course, or every week, but there's also, you can publish or share poems about current events. You can share poems you've written recently, that you've published recently, anything you'd like to share. It's open lines for the next hour or so, and we'll get to as many poets as we can. And please share some poems. I'll be right back with more poetry. And we're back. Thanks for your patience. Katie Dozier, our prompt poem editor, is right here as well. And we're going to be talking about prompt poems. And the prompt for this week was to, let me get it on the screen. Lana had a lot of stuff for us to share, so I got to scroll way down. Hang on. There we go. This week's prompt was right here. It was to, there we go. It was to write a one-sentence poem that includes 2 truths and a lie. So that was the prompt. It was inspired, if you remember, by last week's guest, Elizabeth McMoon-Tatenko. Her book, Various Lies, had some, it was all about various lies, as you would imagine. And then also, she edits one-sentence poems. And so we combined those, or Katie did, combine those into a one-sentence poem that includes 2 truths and a lie. So here is my poem for this week. And this is playing 2 truths and 1 lie with your father. It was like talking tautologies with a philosopher in an off-campus bar as the lights dimmed and the music dipped below the distant chatter of the patrons left scattered like balls on the table out back where he took you some nights to hustle for rent, to fake teach you to pool. The red of his face now the mark of a mark, as in lost but not gone, more hot than unhappy, down on his luck but not life. That's what he taught you, and the game's still unfinished, now that you notice the solids heavy on top and a beer on the railing gone flat, as in lacking fizz, not laid flat, like the mark who fell with a fist and sprawled on the floor, and you ran, the 2 of you, a father and son. He won't show how to shoot, only one of you laughing, and you'd know what it was he was trying to say after all of these years, if only you knew what was. So that is my prompt poem, playing 2 truths and 1 lie with your father. And I think there are some truths and lies in that story as well. So a double twisty use of the prompt there. So what do you have, Katie? I'll move the mic over. So
first, I have to say I'm very impressed that is 1 sentence, and it makes me feel kind of embarrassed by how short my poem is.
Well, first of all, come
That's okay. Okay, I'll come a little closer. Okay. All right, so mine is aggression, which anybody who knows me probably thinks that means it's a poker poem. It has absolutely nothing to do with poker, though. So, aggression. A convoy of quails sprint across the road, their eyes suddenly whole stones instead of pebbles, their feather crowns bobbling in the breeze, gray wing beats now speed up to the summit, how the gravel dust flutters as it falls, dandelion seeds, another spell that scatters by my stem just then, while the birds jump too high above the grit to see, at least for me, lay down amongst the other weeds.
Yeah, excellent. Use a twisted environment, using those M dashes in the poem to get through 1 sentence. So what was it like for you? What was your experience with that, writing a 1-sentence poem? Was it more difficult? To me, I think the poem might have, I mean, I liked that it worked as 1 sentence, and maybe I'll keep it that way, but I think the poem might have worked better if I just let it be a few sentences, to be honest. So I don't know if the prompt helped. What do you think?
I think I'm not allowed to complain about my own prompts, first of all. I will remember that. But I found it really challenging. It was very interesting. And actually, one thing I did that I think helped was I changed it into the present tense, which gave it kind of more of a breathless feeling. And I realized also how much I rely on like varying my own sentence lengths when I'm normally writing a poem. So I thought it was a fun challenge. I also realized I think I lie more in poems than I was aware. So I hope everybody else enjoyed it as well.
Very good. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing what everybody else comes with. Of course, you don't have to have a prompt poem, but whatever you'd like to share, feel free to share it now. We'll just go in the order. We have 16 poets. So let's definitely do a 1 poem max. If you were debating between like 1 short poem or 1 long poem, to pick the shorter poem, and we'll see if we have time. Email the poem to me again at openmic@rattle.com, not a Google Doc, because I think it's a little too hard to share. Anyway, here we go with Carla Schwartz up first. Hey, Carla.
Hi. What a great night so far. And I did have 2. My sentences are very short, but I'll just do 1. And I sent you a second version just recently, and that is called Swim Ladder.
Swim Ladder. Okay, let me... here we go. Swim Ladder.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I have a note here that says, all poets are liars in search of the truth.
That's great.
Okay.
It really is.
And this poem contains at least 2 truths and 1 lie. As if swimming twice around the house barge in P-Town Bay, isn't enough. The sun slow baking our skin, the cool water repelling our fear of sharks. As if that isn't enough, the real trial begins when I reach the swim ladder. Its bottom rung, that should be rung, its bottom rung slathered with seaweed, slippery and decrepit with rust. That rung so high I'm forced to bend my knees more than naturally comfortable, while one of the rubber grips on the handle is missing, so that holding on for the haul up means digging my hand into the thin metal of it, and when I thrust with all the forward momentum I can muster until the pain of my knees and hand is so unbearable, I plunge back into the water with the realization that landing on the deck will take more than hope.
Yeah, excellent poem. Thanks so much for sharing that, Carla. And it's a great example of, I think, the breathless feel that these poems have. You know, when you're writing with one sentence, it sort of propels you forward and makes you sort of almost out of breath. So it almost is a good vehicle for anxious type poems, right?
I agree. And this one I felt worked as one sentence. But I have in the past also written one sentence poems that after later revisions, decided, one sentence isn't the point of the poem.
Mm-hmm.
It's to write the good poem. So
yeah, well,
so I've done that as
we
well.
want to prompt you to write great poems, and that's what really matters, not sticking to the task. So excellent work,
right.
Carla. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Yep, that was Carla Schwartz with Swim Ladder. And next up, let's go to Dick Westheimer.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, Dick, how you doing?
Good. I was taken a little off guard. I didn't get that little message. The host is asking you to unmute, so I had to take it upon myself to unmute without your request.
So what have you got to share with us today?
I think even though it's a little longer than my 72-word Poets Respond poem, I want to do the prompt poem because it's a prompt poem. You guys have converted me into a prompt poet. So I sent you Hate, Pain, Love, Sting.
Yeah, and so what was your experience writing to this prompt? Was it a difficult one?
Well, I'm used to writing long or varied length sentences, and I have some sort of sense about how to slow those down and speed those up and stuff like that. So I wanted to write sort of a slower paced one sentence poem, and one of the reasons why I want to read it is because just to hear whether it holds together, whether the syntax and the whether the syntax holds together. But the other thing is I decided I was just going to get the lie out of the way and let the truths fall into place. So I just thought, like, it's blackberry season here. I thought, what is the one lie I can tell that everyone will know is a lie, and it's that I hate blackberries.
That's funny.
And so that's how I started the poem, and then I had no sense of where it was going to go from there.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's really cool to hear you trying to slow it down, and I see it ahead of time, and it's a longer poem than we had, so it'd be cool, not to have that breathless pace that the first three poems were doing. Let's hear it.
Okay. Hate, pain, love, sting. I hate blackberries, how their ripening comes in the season when ground hornets venture in number from their nests, how the sweetest fruit is hidden among the fiercest thorns, that no matter how aggressively I prune, they grow lank and aggressive like sentient whips in the hand of some god whose purpose is to remind me that at some point I must pay, something I am unaccustomed to as I've lived milk-fed and fattened at the taking in of the capitalist teat, and the killing diseases have looked away as I've passed by. So yes, to get at those berries, right at the time they are ready to warm my chin with juice that's honeyed enough to charm those goddamn hornets from my any lures I set out for them. To get at those berries, I must be willing to bleed, to rend my garments like some biblical prophet when their God is blasphemed, like the Lord of Blackberries is when I take her name in vain and complain that I have to suffer so, work so hard at the harvest, when it's the cane that gives more than I can ever offer, which makes it and me like lovers, I guess. The giving, the pain, the fruit and its juices, the tears and the taking, the love and its making, the blossom and the bee.
Yeah, excellent. That was great use of that form, and I think it sounded, in a way, it was hard to tell it was a one sentence poem, but then you look through, there's no tricks to cut through and make the sentence longer. It's really well done. Excellent poem. Thanks, Dick.
Yeah, thanks so much. Appreciate the prompt, Katie.
Yep. Take
Bye.
care. It was Dick Westheimer, of course, with Hate, Pain, Love, Sting. And next we have, let's see, who's next in line? Oh, Audrey Friedman is next in line.
Hi, Tim, Kate.
Hey, Audrey. Yeah, good to see you.
Good to see you. I mailed you two for the last week in this, but I'll just read this. Two Truths and a Lie, The Weaving of a Myth.
Well, it's tiny. These are short.
It is.
You can do both poems, Audrey.
Thank you, my friend.
This is a 3-line poem for anybody who hasn't
Okay.
glanced at it yet. But yeah.
This is the minimalist side of me.
Excellent.
The Weaving of a Myth. I can't dance on a spider's web or spin yarn filament fine, but at least Arachne doesn't bite her worshippers.
Oh, that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that, Audrey. That was great. The weaving of a myth. Really interesting little poem there.
Okay, and the other one was the sonnet with a number in it I missed last week. August chills. He reached under skirts, hidden by rows of tall ripe corn. He spread her child thighs to show joys only grown women should know. Upon penetration, her cries were heard only by the golden ears, cloaked in silk and tight green husk. She kept the pain for over 6 years and still can smell the gardener's musk. Secrets are flying from dying lips. Finally, she sheds the shame of abuse. How the old man's game was to trip young girls in fields. How obtuse this lady, chill and enigmatic. Her life, undoubtedly problematic.
Oh, wow. Very hard, painful poem. Thanks for sharing that. A sonnet, August Chills, Audrey.
It's a challenge to take stories of those you know and try to put yourself in their place, telling their stories.
Yeah, definitely true. Very, very difficult and excellent use of the sonnet form there. Thanks, Audrey.
Thank you.
And that was Audrey Friedman with August Chills and The Weaving of a Myth. And next we have Nate Jacob.
Hey there.
Hey, Nate. Good to see you.
I went ahead and produced a not very good prompt poem for the week.
Well, I bet you're wrong.
Katie got me this time.
I bet you're wrong, and also no such thing. Maybe.
No such thing. Yeah.
So.
No. So here we are. It's called The Laughing Hand of Fate. It is 2 truths and a lie. Most of my poems are several lies pointing towards truth, but that's about as well as I do. The Laughing Hand of Fate. I was a young shooting star, voted Mr. Personality by my high school class, given a rubber hand trophy, then sent off to war in Iraq, where the first IED took aim and laid claim to my other hand. Saluting be damned for a man qualified only from then to work through the irony of career choices. I swear, at Target, forever in crosshairs of movers and shakers in the war zone of a retailing world.
Oh, wow. The Laughing Hand of Fate. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Nate.
Thank you.
The Laughing Hand of Fate by Nate Jacob. Let's go to Laura Berg.
Hi.
Hey,
Hello.
Laura. Yeah, good to see you. How you doing tonight?
Doing good. This was fun to do this. Okay. Well, here was my effort at one sentence. Grand buoy. Darling, our most fabulous lie, the grand buoy, and all the smaller lovely lies that keep us afloat. Ones I tell you, you tell me, and some we just hold close. These little ducklings all have happy endings. When you eat my barley soup, read my poems, when I listen to your Sufi drums, let you pull me in the ocean, we kiss and linger, holding on for dear life.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Laura. That was Grand Buoy, right? I was trying to pull it up in time, and right, that was Grand Buoy.
Grand buoy.
Excellent. Yeah, well, thanks so much for sharing that. Another great prompt poem. We're not going to ask anybody what the truth or the lie are. I think that's part of the poetic license when you're doing a prompt like this, right?
We'll trust you, yeah.
Yeah, but thanks, Laura. It's always a pleasure.
Okay.
Okay, and next up, let's go to Emily D.
Hey, how are you doing?
Good. How you doing, Emily?
It's nice to see the two of you together, two smiling faces like that.
Yeah, it's nice to be in the same house where you could just say, hey, come on over and don't do the Zoom.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And then I have no technical aspects. I just walk into a room, which is great for me also.
Excellent.
So what did you what did you have for us, Emily?
I sent you two. One of them, I still can't decide. Do
Well,
you
I
see
think
them?
when they're tiny, you can do both. And it's another like it's not 3 lines, it's 6, but they're short, so it's about the same.
But I counted. It's 20 words.
20 words, okay. So it's more than Audrey. Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, that's
right.
totally fine though. So yeah, feel free to do both. It's okay.
All right, thank you. You're very gracious. This is called Lie, Truth, Truth, Any Order. To survive, the most honest woman I know hides a bottle of vodka under the kitchen sink behind the steel wool.
Oh, that's really another really moving poem in so few words. Thanks for sharing that, Emily.
All right, this next one has a lot of long sentences in it. So I kind of made a long sentence poem.
Okay.
All right, title of this one is Leaving Aliquippa. In my yellow headband, red and black feathers. In Danny's brushed leather holster, a shiny silver cap gun. We played in the stingy shade of the ragged lilac as his young mother sweat at the stove with the baby on her hip. We sat on the stoop of her kitchen, and in the anachronistic time travel available only to 4-year-olds, we were driving the old Studebaker to Ambridge, my love, Danny, and I, with feathers and cap gun. I was at the wheel, gripping magic air tightly, executing wide and wild turns, heaving my little body left, then right, like NASCAR. Danny protested. I thought we were going to Ambridge. We are. You can't turn the wheel on the bridge, we'll crash. He was right. We'd been driving long enough to have reached the Ambridge Aliquippa Bridge. My first deep shame of not knowing, I ran off angry, unaware his mother, the baby, and he would soon cross that bridge and never come back. And now I'll walk straight on that bridge, its metal lattice girders like a lace collar laid over the shoulders of the Ohio that I touch and love for the feel of it, unlike a string of pearls around the neck, not worn often. And here I'll drop from my hand a not too heavy stone, smooth and round, the stone I've been carrying on my palm, into waters that remember fires, burying themselves with deep stabs into glossy black, black that escaped into the sky disguised as clouds, clouds that floated on any colored day over small white towboats that pushed our wealth heaped high on barges, with a long, bleat felt low that rumbled down the river and echoed up the hills, hills that carried the solitary call of freight trains tight against the river, up to our bedroom windows as we lay in the summer nights, anticipating and fighting sleep and pre-remembering our loves. I'll drop this stone from this bridge into this water and ask it to remember everything for me.
Oh, that was a beautiful poem. I love so many lines, especially that metal lace girders or metal lattice like a lace collar laid over the shoulders of the Ohio. Beautiful stuff there. And another heartbreaking poem too that was leaving Aliquippa from Emily DeFerrari. And then of course we saw the other poem too, which was Lie, Truth, Truth, Any Order. So very interesting. Thanks for sharing both. That second one in particular, so many great lines, especially toward the end. Thanks for sharing those, Emily.
Thanks.
Yeah. And next up, it's T.R. Paulson, occasional guest. Nice to see you, T.R. Hey, there you got unmute. There you are. Hello.
I think I was trying, like we were both trying to unmute at the same time.
Well, I'm glad it worked. It's good to see you. Glad you're not working this late at night.
No, I'm on vacation, so.
Ah, perfect. Okay.
And the timing was perfect because my poem that I'm going to share was prompted by a prompt from none other than Kelly Grace Thomas.
Oh, well, that's perfect. Yeah. And I don't know if I mentioned that Kelly Grace, she's on Rattlecast number 80 and a great poet. Her book, Boat Burned, was just wonderful. I still a copy up there on the desk, on the bookcase. That's the word. So what was the prompt that inspired this one?
I don't remember.
You just know the source. Well, that's just as good, though.
the prompt, I vaguely remember it, and I pop into it. She and I are both students of Kim Adonesio's, so we're sort of peers, but I also pop into some of her classes just because I am a workshop junkie and a class junkie, and my least favorite part of writing, as a lot of people know, is the alone time. So I take way more classes and way more workshops than I even can keep up with, just because I need the social interaction.
Well, that's
so
great,
it was in, she writes some great prompts. I really highly recommend going to her website and signing up for her newsletter. And you get a free prompt every time she sends a newsletter. But this one was actually in one of her classes. And so, I was really relating to what Lana was talking about, the relationships between poets. And, this poem that I'm going to read is a Mean Girls poem about a 13-year-old Mean Girls type moment. But the irony is that I read this poem and it means something to me because it represents the the poet friendship that I have with Kelly. So there's a lot of irony there, I guess.
Yeah, that's great.
And I'm grateful to One Art for giving it a home. I need to throw that in. They're a great journal.
Yeah, they really are. Mark Danowski, great editor. And One Art, you can find One Art, of course, at oneartpoetry.com. And here's TR's poem on the screen right now. Go ahead whenever you're ready.
Somewhere between 7th and 8th grade. I never liked the bone, the tin and tone of voice, the slap of silence, clamp of air when someone called out, "It's for you." I can still hear the girl who'd best friended me, her voice soft as glitter, sweet as night falling to stars smothered beyond the fog. Her words, not quite a quiet whip, but a rope intended to tie like wire and air. She listed friends as unchecked squares on a multi-choice test. She multiplied her choices, any of the above. Even now, the phrase "you rang," still used by my mother, replays like a song, stale with time. My friend said she'd chosen everyone except me.
Oh, that was great, TR. And, my daughter is like that exact age, just entering 8th grade. And so I've kind of been reliving that whole experience through her because I kind of forgot what it was like to be that old. And that really hits it home, too, because that's you can really relate. Hearing her stories every day.
My niece as well just turned 13, and And it's funny because I didn't have a lot of confidence in this poem when I submitted it. I just sort of threw it in with a batch of poems, and I actually thought it was the weakest poem of the batch, but it's the one they took. But then on social media, I got a lot of really good response to it. A lot of people related to it and stuff. So I mean, this poem is definitely a lesson that, and sometimes our poems, I guess, are better than we think they are.
Well, that's definitely a great lesson, and definitely just keep sending stuff out because you never know what's going to resonate with people and what's not. And I think this is one clearly does. Thanks for sharing that. That was in One Art, of course, by T.R. Paulson, The Summer Between 7th and 8th Grade. And of course, you can see it here at oneartpoetry.com. And they do a poem or two, Mark Danowski does, every day at oneartpoetry.com. So check out that website. It's always great to show other literary magazines. And we have a great relationship with Mark, too. So it's fun to see that one in particular be shared. Next up, let's go to Mike Bales.
Good evening.
Hello, Mike. Yeah, good to see you.
Yeah, I took the very minimalist approach because I guess people kind of in a critique group kind of railed against me doing long run-on sentences, except they liked that one poem I wrote for you where it was love and infection as a run-on sentence. They liked that I wrote for you. This was almost center like the poem Third and Main that I sent to you.
Yeah.
But downtown Davenport, if you really look up closely at these old buildings in downtown Davenport, and there's another aspect of Davenport too. So this is Third and Main. Stone faces on brick buildings bear their age and speak as a lone figure wanders in shadows.
Oh, I love that. That's another poem I can relate to. So we're going that, but the Rust Belty, Western New York, a lot of brick buildings and stone faces, wishing they could still speak or something like that. Beautiful little poem. Thanks for sharing that, Mike.
Thanks. I'm glad you like it.
Yeah, take care. So Mike Bales with Third and Main. And next, Paul Mitchell Bernstein is here.
Hey.
Hey, Paul. Good to see you.
You unmuted me. How'd you do that?
I did. Yeah, it's magic.
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great.
You're good. Yeah, you've answered that question like 20 times so far.
Nah, it's all right. It's all right. It's good to be friendly, and it's great to see you again because a new participant in the open lines. But you've been leaving great comments, and it's really nice to see you. So, what do you have to share?
So I have a short one sentence poem. That I wrote a few of them, and when I sat down to write, I was wishing that it was I just went blank. What is it? Two truths and a lie. I was wishing that it was two lies and a truth because truths are so much more difficult than lies. So I wrote a couple of really sappy sort of Roses Are Red poems that illustrated how lies are easier to spread than truths, and sort of the lie proved the two truths, and it was like Roses Are Red type of format, and I thought it was very clever, and for that reason decided not to submit it because somebody said something about the clever poet or something, like one of the so anyway, I wrote this one, and I sort of wrote it as a list poem. It could be read as a list poem or just as a single sentence. It's called In Mourning.
Okay.
I went for a walk this morning on Olive Street, where long and whimsical ribbons of willow and wisteria once hung along a span of sidewalk beside a church with 7 stained glass saints.
Oh, I love that, the way you have the ellipses on both sides of that in the title and the end. This continuation. Like the poem starts before and ends after, and just sort of popping into it. I really like that. Thanks for sharing that, Paul.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep, take care. That was Paul Mitchell Bernstein with In Mourning. And Mark Grinier is next in line. Hey, Mark, are you there?
Yes, I'm there. Just slow.
It's all right. It's good to see you.
This is a prompt poem that I just barely finished after your session here has started, so hopefully it has some merit. Two Truths and a Lie in Paint. I'm still editing it, as you can tell.
Perfect.
The sun brought down into new mown fields. Monet's paint haystacks blaze like sun so bright. It makes this room look drab and mundane. Makes the natural world it depicts go brown, like a world without joyousness does, settling quietly into the ground like a mouse quietly hiding. Or perhaps in the looming dark, looking up at Van Gogh's Starry Night, spirals and swirls of light foreshadowing the images built by the Hubble in space, or by the new Jack Webb's constellation of hexagonal mirrors, peering so far back into time that galaxies are tiny blobs of red, red shifted away out of time and space back to the bursting of the Big Bang egg that created this darkness today. The iconic darkness of Munch's screen, staring out at me under an orange sky, under a bridge over troubled waters, with its deathly figures looming behind that bald mannequin dressed in black, covering his ears as he tries not to hear his horrible screech, streaming endlessly out of his dread and despair, blinding all to the light.
Yeah, excellent poem. Thanks for sharing that, Mark. There you can see how, being forced to write long sentences makes that poem really come to life. There's so many great lines, and you expect a sentence to be over, and then pushing it forward sort of pushes you in your poetry to go to a deeper place and dig deeper. It's really interesting to see this in a lot of the poems this week. Thanks for sharing that.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Yeah. So Mark Grenier with Two Truths and a Lie. Interesting, too, that the Starry Night keeps coming up over and over again. It's funny. Katie and I wrote an essay that's coming out for, it's going to be on, what's that place? Lit Mag News.
Yes.
And we mentioned Starry Night, and all of a sudden there's Starry Nights in every poem we look at.
And we saw Starry Night this year also, and took a selfie with it, most importantly.
We did. Yes, we did. Where was that? I don't remember. Los Angeles?
In MoMA.
In MoMA?
That was in New York. Yeah.
In New York? Okay. I don't even know. All right.
You saw the real thing, actually?
Yeah, we saw the real thing. We fought through the crowd to get within 10 feet of it. Yeah,
I've never
a lot of
seen the
selfie
real
sticks.
thing.
Yeah.
You can poke your eye out. All right, well, thanks, Mark. That was a great poem. I loved a lot of the lines there. All right, let's see what we have next. Rob Harris is next up.
Hello.
Hey, Rob. Great to see you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. How are you doing?
I'm great. Yeah, it's a great night for poetry all around. What do you have to share?
I think so. Well, last week I wrote a prompt poem, and I mentioned the passing of Jimmy Buffett. And I could have told you at that point you'd get a ton of Jimmy Buffett poets because that's just the way he was. And
it really was. I didn't realize. I guess he had like an email list, right? I heard someone else say that he had an email list that had like hundreds of thousands of people to get messages from Jimmy, and it was like a really like personal, intimate kind of thing. I had no idea.
The tributes coming in from his wife, from his children, from people who were inspired by him. I would count myself among that group. You had asked for a suggestion of a poem or two, or a song or two of his to check out. I would give you a song called Cowboy in the Jungle. It's my favorite Jimmy Buffett song. It's not one that most people would think of.
Mm-hmm.
But I really like the message. I really like the story, and his songs just created stories and fit a mood, and it's really it inspired me to write a poem for this week. I hope you don't mind another Jimmy Buffett poem.
Oh, definitely not at all. It was, it's one of the things I loved having the open lines when we just had it as a show, because we got to see so many poems about the same type of topics and everybody's different perspective on it. So it's really cool to hear another one. Thanks for sharing this, Rob. Let's hear it.
Sure. It's called Remember 324. Goes like this. Since Jimmy Buffett passed away, his New York Times obituary has required 2 corrections so far. But his first musical offering sold exactly 324 copies, and his second album's master tapes somehow disappeared before their release. Disappointments and failures are maybe the worst barometers of an artist's true potential. It might even be said that the harder someone falls, the higher they could rise if they keep plugging away.
Oh, that's great lesson there. Another more facts I didn't know. So very fascinating to learn about.
I'm grateful. If I put out an album and it only sold 324 copies, I'd be like, well, I'm going back to school, or I'm finding something else to do with my life. But I'm glad he didn't take that approach, and I'm glad he felt like he still had something to say. And I think we're all better off that he did. So thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Great lesson for us all, and really, it's really inspiring. I had no idea that Jimmy Buffett was this meaningful to so many people. It's really been interesting. That's how I get to learn. It's a privileged place to be, getting to learn about the world through poetry. But yeah, I had no idea.
Well, I would suggest the more you find, the more you'll probably enjoy. Hopefully.
Very cool. Well, thanks, Rob.
Sure. Thank you.
Yep, that was Rob Harris with Remember 324. Next in line, we have Sandra Iannone, who's been on before, but not for a long time. It's great to see you again, Sandra.
So great to see you, Tim. And what a great show tonight. Oh my gosh. I've been looking forward to it all day, and it's lived up to its unbelievable billing in my head.
Oh, that's great. I'm so glad to hear it.
Well, I wish that I had done the prompt, because obviously look at what it's produced with people tonight. Incredible. But it is 9/11, and I woke up this morning. I just moved to the East Coast from the West Coast after 22 years, and I'm living with my mom now. And my dad passed away a year and a half ago, and that kind of prompted the move. And so I read this poem to her this morning, and I thought, oh, I'm coming to Rattlecast tonight. I knew I was going to be coming. I really wanted to hear the interview with Lana, and I thought, okay, yeah, why not? Oh. Why not a 9/11 poem? It's fine.
Yeah, well, it is definitely, for sure. You have to read it. I can't open the file, but that's okay.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
We'll just have to listen as you read, but I'm looking forward to it.
Okay. It's called Rock, Scissors, Paper, the Anniversary Edition, September 11th, 2020. On the day that the planes torpedoed the sky and ash ticker taped the city until someone identified those zombied alive as inhaling the remains of the pulverized dead. On this anniversary of that day, fire plagues the West on top of a plague. Is today the apocalypse we always dream of never arriving? My father, betrayed by his own brain, thinks so. Earlier this morning, once again on a cell phone, he names everything madness, as he has managed to do for months, the dementia scaling the walls of his brain like floodwaters, and he's the most lucid of anybody I know. The sun, a round creamsicle lozenge, I would pull down from the sky and swallow, if not for knowing how it would burn, setting inside my throat and rendering me speechless. And if not September, I'd believe I was witness to an afternoon's delight of winter, the sky a light flowering of snow. Is this how the first blizzard recorded snuck up on us? That Crayola sun beckoning me to come play outside until I was drenched in hypothermic chill. Is this how water tricks one to drown? The trickster apocalypse playing everyone for the fool says so. Says, don't believe anyone you cannot taste. And so I'm left to remember her salt, her sweet, like I remember the mist before a downpour, her hair's 5-alarm deluge all around me, my ability to see reduced to an afterthought of grace. This is how horror attends the masquerade ball, dressed as bliss, and why I returned to her week after weakening week as she became perfectly round, an undiscovered planet and a blown glass float all at the same unapproving time. And this sun now, a blazed gumdrop behind a curtain of September's snow-crusted trees, glows strangest as night prepares to arrive, wearing no mask of snowflakes, no delusions of oncoming stars.
Oh, that was a beautiful poem. A great one to not have the visual for, because just closing your eyes and imagining all those images, and great reading too. Beautiful poem, Sandra.
Thank you so much, Tim. Thanks as always.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, that was Sandra Iannone with Rock, Scissors, Paper. Beautiful, beautiful poem. Thanks for sharing that. All right, and next up we have Mary Lisa de Dominicius.
Hi.
Hey, Mary Lisa, good to see you.
Good to see you. Good to see everybody. This is such a nice community.
Yeah, it really is. I just love it. It's what I always hoped we would have, and we have it. You know, it's great.
Somebody said to me yesterday, well, I'll tell you, Peter Murphy said to me yesterday, you're the hardest working person he knows. The hardest working editor he knows.
Well,
he
thanks.
said,
That's really nice of Peter. I mean, he's a great, speaking of prompt poems, I mean, he's got that book, More Prompts for the Delusional, and a sequel, I think, too. And so he is the prompt king, hardest working prompt generator on the planet, that's for sure. And a great poet, too. We could check out his Rattlecast. I don't know when that was. I can't remember anymore. Like 50, maybe, I'd guess. But he's a great poet, and great to hear from him.
Yeah, I thought that was nice. So should I just start?
Yeah, go ahead. And this is there's a Murphy writing prompt that you included, too. So explain what that is. Yeah.
I wasn't sure if you wanted me to go over that. So Friday we had the critique of the week. Mm-hmm. And Thursday and Friday, you and Katie were talking about shorter poems. Mm-hmm. You know, how a lot of people think long, and I'm like the long poet queen. I'm like Dick. You know, tell me to write a 5-page poem. Easy. Tell me to cut it down. That's a hard thing. So anyway, so your Friday prompt, right, was write a poem that is in one sentence, and has in it one truth and two lies. Let me intercede myself here for a second. I have like a 5-page poem that has no punctuation, and it's like 5,000 words. So this was really hard. Katie, it's like yours. It's short. So here was the Murphy writing prompt, and what I did was I combined them both. Write a poem or story that uses imagery of the sea or beach or some other natural landscape to revisit an important relationship from your past. Name the place and begin with a few lines of pure description. Use the 5 senses. Tell a secret, tell a lie, and never tell anyone which is which. So you both wanted a lie, and I was like, okay, I'm going to get this down to one sentence. And it's amazing what a prompt will do too. I'm sorry, I don't want to take up too much time, but it always amazes me because, you know, you'll have like an incident and you're brewing it over and you're ruminating and you're thinking about it and you can't write the poem. And then somebody throws a prompt at you and you think you're writing about crickets and then bam, you're writing about something else. and it's the thing you wanted to write about like for a year. So, all right. Okay. I'm going to go.
Okay.
This is fun. It's called Drowned Out. I know Katie agrees with me.
I do agree with you. It's true.
Okay. Drowned Out. She hates me because I remember Connecticut, the screaming sound of crickets falling from the sky at night, the mountainsides blooming with insect whistles, their sirens so thick, so dense, there was barely space for anything else to make noise that year, except for when the ocean tried to eat my 4-year-old brother, who I tried to rescue but couldn't because I and where was she when the sea silenced the crickets and the sea silenced the sound of my brother crying out for help, his mouth full of salt, his nose burning, his body bobbing like a tiny toy in the waves, like her toy. She said to me, "Here, watch this while I go."
Oh, that's great. What a powerful ending, Mary Lisa. And, you know, it just does show you how the prompt poems work to bring out stuff, like you were saying. Like, it's like they sneak up on you. Like, you let your guard down because, oh, I'm just writing a prompt poem.
Just a little prompt poem, so innocent. No.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was excellent. Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Mary Lisa. It's always great to see you, and an excellent poem, too.
You also, everybody. Okay,
yeah.
Bye.
All right, take care. As Mary Lisa de Dominicius with a Drowned Out. Couple more people on the lines. We have Lisa Seidenberg, another poet who's been on before, but not recently, I think. Hey, Lisa, how are you doing?
No, this is my debut. I have never been.
This is your debut? Oh, I guess I've seen you in the comments a lot. So there you go.
I've been following the critiques of of the week for a few weeks, but I've never had the nerve to go on the Rattlecast.
Oh, well, I'm so glad. That shouldn't require any nerve. It's just fun. We're all just hanging out, sharing some poems.
Yeah, that's when they say when you're about to skydive. Oh, don't worry about it. So I did the prompt, the one-line prompt, and I thought, well, I'm actually a big fan of Sparrow. Are you familiar with him?
No,
he does,
I'm not actually. Mm-hmm.
Oh, he's wonderful, funny one-line poems, and they're really one line. They're not one line that go on for 5 pages. No insult to anybody who did long poems. And so I also took the prompt to do to be less, to do less is more.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's really interesting. So who's the Sparrow? Where would we find that? Because it's not something you can Google. So how would we?
I actually just Googled to see if he was on. Google poet Sparrow. He lives up in Woodstock. He's, I guess, yeah. And I follow him on Twitter, and he posts poems almost every day, like one-line poems, and they're great. They're political, and they're usually 7-8 words.
Oh, that's really interesting. I'll have to look that up for sure.
Oh, you could have him on. It might not take very long, but he's good. He's very good. Do you have my poem?
I do. Yeah, go ahead whenever you're ready.
I go ahead? Yep. Okay. So this is my prompt, the one line. Every day after school, I returned home and unlocked the door. That's the title. My lone key fit neatly in the empty hole.
Oh, that's a beautiful one-line poem. I love that. That is so good to fit so much in one line with the title. Yeah, I love that, Lisa. And the idea of minimalism too, with a one-line poem is a direction no one's gone yet. So that's really cool to see. I forgot, since it's your first time, where are you calling from? I usually ask people that.
I'm in Connecticut.
Connecticut. All right. Well, it's great.
I related to the crickets in the last Connecticut in the poem.
Perfect. Well, it's great to see you. I hope you, now that you've been on, you see that it's not hard. You join us again anytime you'd like.
Thank you. This was fun.
Yep. Thanks, Lisa. Bye. Yeah, that was Lisa Seidenberg with Every Day After School, I Return Home and Unlock the Door. And then it's tempting to read the one line again, but I won't. You have to go back, hit rewind just to see the rest. Next we have George, Odd Writings, with us. It's good to see George too. It's been a bit for George. He's in the summer issue, of course, the NFT Poets with his palindrome poems. What do you got for us today, George?
Hey, Tim. Hope everybody can hear me okay.
Yeah, we can. We definitely can. Yeah.
So I submitted the Insanity Defense. And so do you have it there?
I'm gonna have to pull it up. So it's unsubmittable. Let me. There's a few ways that you might have submitted. I can't remember how you do it. It says George Pastana, of course, also known as Odd Writings, and it pops right up when I search for it. Okay, so I have it here. The Insanity Defense. Another brevity. We get the brevity going on again. Yeah.
Okay, as long as you can see it, let me know when to start.
Okay, let me make sure it fits on the screen first. Okay, let's go ahead whenever you're ready. Is there anything you want to say about it before you read it?
Well, philosophers will immediately recognize something about this, but I'll go ahead and just read it.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
The title is The Insanity Defense. The content of this sentence clause is false, even though its author, big surprise, only sometimes lies.
Well, it's quite the riddle you got for us there, George. Very good.
I think it was 2 lies and 1 truth, or was it 2 truth and 1 lie?
It was 2 truth and 1 lie.
Unless that's a lie.
Unless that's a lie. Yeah, definitely. You got my head spinning. All right. Well, George,
thanks.
Yeah, thanks, George. It's always a pleasure hearing from you, and I so love your participation in the chat windows over the last several months. It's been great to have you on all the time.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. There's George Pastana once again, also known as Odd Writings with the Insanity Defense. And we have Bishwajit Mishra. Might be the last one. Yeah, I believe Bishwajit's last. Oops, I didn't mean to do that, though. Okay. Hey, Bishwajit, how are you? Yeah, great to see you.
I'm good, thanks. Good evening, Katie and Tim. Good to see you guys. And it's so interesting I'm generally at the end of writing longer than I would like to. Yeah. So if I get a chance to write short poems, I wish I could have more prompts like that. Whether it's good or not, I don't care. But
that's great.
Yeah, you get tired of words, right? Sometimes you say too many words.
So which poem is this, Bishop?
It's September.
Okay, I'll pull it up. Okay, anything you want to say about it before you read?
Yeah, they definitely got 2 truths and 1 lie and more untruths.
That's great.
Yeah, I was not sure I was going to write this or something like that because I had something come up. I had to travel it, but I took a walk and sat by a pond, and whatever I saw, I wrote. I just twisted a little bit, and it fitted into one sentence poem. I didn't have to make it work that way. It just was 1 sentence. You can see it.
Okay.
On a breezy September afternoon, the sun is shaken, is moist, is left with just an afterglow like a bald deodorant stick, while trees and a lone bee hold their ground. Even clouds show their permanence, but the pond keeps holding it as walkers and cars pass by. Fall is gravitational, needs no preparation. Waiting, maybe.
Oh, that's excellent. I love that addition at the end. That waiting maybe works really well. And you see, in 1 sentence, you still have to have a progression of some kind in a poem. That's a good example of how you got that to work. Thanks for sharing that, Bishop. That's great.
Yeah, thank you. And obviously, the lie, you can see the cloud shows their permanence. That is the biggest lie.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there it is. Yep. Thanks so much. Always a pleasure, Bishop.
Have a good night. Thank you.
You too. Bye. It was Bishop Misher with September. We do have one more poet, actually. PLA Hay. I'm sorry, I got confused with PMB. So the P starting acronym thing threw me off a little bit, but we have you now. How you doing?
Hey guys, I'm so excited to see Katie and Tim. I follow you guys, and I'm just so excited. I do have one quick liner or one sentence. It's called "Time Waster."
Okay, yeah, and this is Paul Lawrence Adino. That's what PLA stands for. Yeah, great. And where are you calling from, Paul? Before I always ask first-time callers that. Where are you calling from?
Yeah, I'm calling from Stockbridge, Georgia, which is outside of Atlanta.
Oh, great. Well, it's always cool to see, where people are. It's really fun to know that the Rattlecast is bouncing around all over different states and countries. So what do you got for us?
Love you guys. You guys are awesome.
Oh, thanks.
And your love for the poetry community. This one is called Time Waster.
Okay.
And it goes like this. My tears are falling on my shirt and hand, thinking longer as I stand here, contemplating the more my time is wasted.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, very good. Time waster. I love that. Thanks for sharing that, Paul.
Yeah, thank you guys for allowing me to read it. Appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. Hope you come on again. It's always good to see new faces and good to see you.
Yeah, same here. Have a great evening, guys.
Yep, you too.
Bye.
Yeah, that was Paul Lawrence Adino with Time Waster. And that is going to wrap up the open lines right at a good time. So let's do, what do? Let's do the Sciku first. We'll do the Sciku and then we'll do the next week's prompt. That's how we'll do it. I haven't figured this out yet for when we have the guest editor.
Well, I don't want to wait longer for the Sciku, so I vote for that anyway.
Okay. Well, we'll do the Sciku this week. And the Sciku is based on this story from Yale News. Where is love? Musical recognition crosses cultures with an exception. And, as I can't help it, but point out some terrible science. It's just so many, like somebody took so much time to do this study. And so what they did is they took, let me see the numbers. They had 14-second snippets of 4 types of song. They played it to 5,000 people. They had in 49 countries, 100 individuals. There's all this work. And what they found is that, where are the 4 categories now? There was dance music, there was lullabies, and there was like supportive, like healing type music, or there were love songs. And what they found is if you don't know the language or the culture at all, you can identify the dance music and you can identify the healing and you can identify the lullabies, but you can't tell what's a love song and not. But those are completely different categories of song. It's like one's a topic and the other are like actual styles. I mean, it makes no sense. So of course that's the one that doesn't fit. Like what? Anyway, that was a study, and it's interesting though to hear music from completely different cultures that you have no connection to. They have a little quiz if you find this link, and you can sort of play along, and it's really fun. But of course, you can't tell what's a love song because some love songs are fast and happy and some are sad and depressed, and it's like all different, and it's like a topic, and it's not like a genre where you're trying to get people moving with a beat or putting a baby to sleep. Anyway. Anyway, I mean, that's just the state, people publish just to publish, but there's so much effort went into this. It's a beautiful thing, they did in a way, but it makes no scientific sense. So anyway, that is the study that drew my eye this week. And the Sciku is here. Naming the love song impossible. Naming the love song impossible. That is your Sciku for the week, and that is the show for the week. Thanks everybody for joining us. Now, as we're going to go on to announce the prompt for next week, inspired by Lana Hechtman Ayers. And what is it, Katie? I'll put it on screen.
That will be of help to me.
Yeah, I'll put it on the screen right here, and you can say, and then I'll reveal it slowly. Okay.
Write a sequel, a poem that refers to another poem and starts immediately after the events in that poem.
Yeah, so that is a sequel. Write a sequel, which is a thing I think we might have just made up. So Lana loves after poems, and there's so many poems in both of these books that are after other poems. We saw a bunch today, but what we're going to do is, instead of an after, a sequel. And that is so the example that Katie had when she was talking about this to me from the other side of the room about an hour ago was if you were doing this Ginsberg's poem, The Supermarket, what's it called?
A Supermarket in California.
Yeah. So if you're doing a supermarket in California, that poem ends, and then the speaker goes outside in the parking lot. And so that's the sequel. Start there, and your poem starts with the same characters and the same scene, the same environment, but finishes the poem like a sequel would to a movie.
So I had it as Ginsberg forgot to buy ketchup, so he's walking back in, and then Whitman that he's walking with gets trapped in the automatic sliding doors.
There you go.
That was the start.
That was her sample poem. So write a sequel, which is again a poem that refers to another poem and starts immediately after the events in that poem. So a sequel, maybe the first one ever. We'll see. That'll be your prompt for next week. And next week's guest in the Rattlecast is going to be Penny Harder. And she's got 3 books, too. I don't know what we're doing with these prolific poets lately. But Penny Harder has 3 books that she sent me. Her most recent is Keeping Time, Hyben for the Journey, which might be a good hint at what next week's prompt could be. I don't know. But Penny Harder is just a great poet. They're not all Hyben, but she's great in the haiku community. Does write a lot of Hyben, other books as well. Just a wonderful person. A lot of people know her already. That's Penny Harder, Rattlecast 211, with the prompt to write a sequel. And that's going to be Monday, September 18th, the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you then. Hope you have a great week. In the meantime, I'll talk to you later, and we'll let Katie say goodbye, too.
Goodbye, everybody. Thanks so much. It was so much fun.
All right, take care. Bye, everybody.